When I was 14, I would spend the summer holidays away from school at home. In the small village I lived in, this meant I mainly spent my days on my own, just watching TV and playing The Sims. My parents were generally out of the house from 8 AM until 5 PM. I was raised to never answer the door to strangers. However, my favourite spot in the living room was right next to the window, so I could always see people on the street, and in turn, they could see me. One day, I was sat watching daytime TV when I noticed a man walking down our street. As our street has a dead end, I normally recognize everyone who walks down it, but I'd certainly never seen this guy before. He was tall, thin, and unshaven. He was wearing a hooded jumper with the hood up and his sleeves rolled up as well, revealing tattoos on his arms. He was carrying a large duffel bag and was looking closely at each house he passed. As I was sat there watching him, I was clearly in full view. He started to pass our house, and when he saw me, he smiled and started walking up our short drive. He came up to our front door and knocked. I knew I shouldn't answer, but he had seen me, and at 14 I was afraid of being rude to an adult, so I obediently went and opened the door a crack. I peeked around the door and said hello. As he spoke, he pulled the duffel bag around to the front of his body and asked me if my parents were home. At this point, I figured he'd probably leave if I said no, but instead, he stepped forward towards the door and unzipped the bag. Well, the thing is, I just got out of prison. I want to do the right thing, you know? It's so hard to find a job, so I'm trying to sell some things. He started pulling towels, handkerchiefs, and other junk out of his bag. The word prison made my heart skip a beat, and I quickly mumbled something about having no money, and I closed the door on him. He stood outside my door for a minute, still talking to me about being able to help. So I went upstairs and waited for him to leave, which he eventually did. I soon settled back down to watching the TV and forgot all about the encounter. At 5 PM, my parents came home and they took the TV, so I went up to my room. A little while later, there was a knock at the door. I came onto the landing and peered down as my mum answered. 2 police officers were stood there on the step. They asked if anyone had come by that day. My mum said no one had, and that's when I remembered my visitor from earlier. I came down the stairs and said that actually someone had called by. Seeing as I was young, the 2 police officers asked to come inside and talk to me. They asked me to describe the man and the conversation I had with him. They seemed really worried and kept telling me not to worry and to be honest about what happened. Once I'd told them everything, they asked to speak to my parents on their own, and then they thanked me and left. I was straight on at my parents, asking them what was going on. My mum explained that a few minutes after the guy had come to our house, he had gone to another girl's house. She was in the shower and hadn't answered the door when he knocked. Apparently, he let himself into the house and walked upstairs. When he found her in the shower, he sexually assaulted her. With my description and the evidence from the girl, they tracked the guy down. It turned out he had just been released from prison for a similar attack on another girl. I never answer the door when I'm alone now, and I refuse to shower when I'm home alone.
For context, I was about 10 years old at the time, female. Now, the story, I was really excited because my grandparents were going away for the weekend and allowed me to watch their house while they were away. Since we lived right across the street from my grandparents' house, my parents said this was fine. Honestly, my parents let me do a lot of things during my childhood that, in hindsight, as a now adult myself, I should have never done. I have had my fair share of creepy experiences, but by some miracle I made it through unscathed. So as any 10-year-old with a sibling, I was excited for some space all to myself. My grandparents didn't leave a key, but instead let the back door unlocked for me. Stupid, I know, but it was a very safe neighborhood and nothing had ever happened a million times before. And this detail is important, so please keep that in mind. So I make my way across the street to their house, water the plants, feed the cats, get their mail, and do my house-watching duties. Once they're finished, I decided that I would spend my time there watching some movies and relaxing in the back room of the main floor. Time begins to pass as it does when you're engrossed in movies, and now it's dark out. I'm ripped out of my movie by knocking at the front door. I'm not worried by this. My grandparents are popular enough and do have friends that sometimes stop by. I figured that if I let the door go unanswered, they'll understand my grandparents are not home and they'll just leave. The knocking continues and the doorbell rings one or two more times and then it stops. Figuring they must have left, I happily return to my movie. Then, without warning, the knocking continues, but it starts to intensify. The sounds echo through the house and it sounds like they're actually surrounding me. Whatever calm, relaxed state I was in previously is completely gone, and my gut was telling me something here was wrong. I was confused as to why this person wouldn't just leave if they thought no one was here. My panic was increasing, and my 10-year-old mind was racing trying to figure out what was going on. All the while, the deafening barrage of doorbells and pounding on the door continues incessantly. Then suddenly, without warning, it stops again, and I've never been so grateful for the silence. I decide to summon my bravery and look out the window, hoping I could recognize the car and realize that it was all just a misunderstanding. I've always been a very paranoid person and was hoping this was just another unnecessary scare. So first, a little outline of my grandparents' house. It's a one-floor house with only a front and back door that has a brick walkway leading from front to back. Okay, so there I am, starting to peek through the window to see if I can recognize the car. Instead, I am locked eye to eye with a man I've never seen before in my life. I can only imagine the terror in my eyes. I tried to examine this man. His eyes showed nothing. No fear, no surprise, no confusion. They were just completely void of emotion. I was looking to find some kindness or hope or something to try to ease my fears and tensions. Well, I found quite the opposite of that. Suddenly his face shifted more determined and he broke our gaze and just kept walking. My brain was screaming at me that something was very, very wrong. Then it hit me and I realized what my head was trying to tell me. He was going to the back of the house, to the unlocked door. He was trying to find a way to 10-year-old defenseless me, home alone in this empty house. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I froze. Everyone, me included, always talks so much smack in horror movies when the victims freeze when the bad guys come to hurt or kill them. Trust me, I knew I needed to go move, but my body just wouldn't allow it. To say my mind was moving a million miles a minute would be putting it lightly. What do I do? Do I call the cops? Do I run and hide? Do I run to my house? All the time telling myself every second that I waste is another second closer to him getting inside. Finally, after being angry at myself for wasting this precious time, now with tears streaming down my face, I grabbed the cordless phone, this was back in the early 2000s, and run into the bathroom and lock the door. In the back of my head the whole time, knowing and hoping this could all still be a misunderstanding, I really didn't want to call the police. I didn't want them to come and for everything to be fine, and I waste everyone's time and just look stupid. It was wildly confusing. And not to mention I was and am a very shy person. Needless to say, I knew I needed help diffusing the situation, so as the child that I was, I called my mom. At this point, I was truly hysterical, barely able to breathe, let alone get out words. Somehow she was able to understand that I was at Grandma's and there was a strange man walking around the back of the house. In a stern, almost angry voice, she just said that, "I'll be right there," and hung up. I clutched the phone like my life depended on it and crouched in the corner of the bathroom waiting for the man to come in and do God knows what. I felt like I waited for hours as I gasped for air in between deep, fearful cries. The silence is broken by the sound of the back door opening, and with it, my stomach dropped. Unsure if this was my mother or the strange man whose dead eyes terrified me. After endless moments of pure terror, my mother calls out that it's her, and it's safe to come out. In one swift motion, I jump up, rip open the door, and run into my mother's sheltering arms. I just stayed there for a while, unable to speak, still processing what just occurred and feeling finally safe in my mother's arms. After a while, I was able to get out, asking what happened to the man. She told me she found him around the back of the house and immediately approached him asking what he was doing. He stated he was looking for an address and worriedly stumbled away to his car and drove off faster than seemed appropriate. There's no way that this man was looking for an address. Why would he continue to pound and pound on the door when no one answered? Why would he walk around to the back of the house? Nothing about that looks like someone searching for an address. After asking around, I heard that sometimes people do that when they're looking to break into a house. They thoroughly pound on the door and make sure that no one answers and that no one is home when they attempt to break in. But why, when he saw that I was inside, did he continue to go to the back of the house in the most ominous way possible? I'll never know that man's true intentions that night, and honestly, I don't know if I want to know. Thankfully, we never saw him again, and no, the police were never called. Not to my knowledge, anyway. My mother watched the house for me for the rest of the weekend as I was too scared to return until the house was no longer empty. Obviously, the story could have ended in many horrible ways, and I'm forever grateful to my mother coming to my rescue. In hindsight, she is very lucky the man didn't have a weapon and was instantly scared off when her presence arrived. The story may not sound like much to you, but to someone who was already paranoid and afraid of most people and things, it was enough to shake me to my core. I still, 15 years later, have irrational fears that haunt me some days and nights, and I'll always be haunted by those dead, empty eyes.
It was the middle of summer, and my parents had left for the weekend to go to our home in Cape Cod. It's about a 2-hour drive away, so it's no big deal for them to leave me at home for a few days. My mum had made some pulled pork and pasta for me to heat up whenever I was hungry, and I had some money if I wanted to order a pizza or something. Things were all good. The first night I was alone, I stayed up until about 3 in the morning playing Xbox, so I woke up really late the next day. I checked my phone when I woke up and saw it was a little past 1 PM. I'd made plans to play some street hockey with a few friends at 3, so I threw myself out of bed and stumbled into the shower. I take really long showers, so when my parents are gone, I go mental. I was in there for about 45 minutes when I heard my back door open. I immediately froze, since obviously I was supposed to be alone. I waited for about 2 minutes, ears trained in trying to hear anything else. Nothing. I figured it was just the wind, or maybe my parents were home early. So I turned off the shower, wrapped my towel around myself, and slowly walked down the stairs to check it out. The bathroom is directly upstairs from the back door, and the thing is pretty loud when it opens and closes. So, the stairs to the kitchen, where the back door is, are pretty tight and walled in, so I can't see into the kitchen when I walk down. Even though my house is old as shit and each step on the stairs makes a super loud creak, I still took my time and tried to be as quiet as possible. I probably took 45 seconds walking down all of the 12 stairs. When I get to the second to last stair, right before I could see around the corner into the kitchen, I take a little breath to compose myself. In my mind, I knew I was being stupid. There obviously wasn't anyone in the kitchen. There's no way I wouldn't have already heard another noise. And there's no reason for them to still be in the kitchen, even if there were burglars or something in the house. After sort of mentally chastising myself for being such a wuss, I sort of chuckled to myself for being so stupid, and just normally walked the last 2 stairs and turned the corner into the kitchen. Standing about 2 feet away from me, in the middle of the kitchen, is a man staring straight at me. perfectly still, with a massive smile across his face. He's just staring at me. The thing I remember most vividly wasn't his face or his smile, but his arms. They weren't just at his side. He held them in the strangest, most abnormal position I've ever seen. They were where one would normally hold their arms, but he had rotated them to the point where they were almost completely reversed, as well as lifting them up and a little bit behind himself. I don't know why I remember this so much, but it's just the most demonic, abnormal position I've ever seen. Honest to God, I think I almost had a heart attack right there. Looking back, I can realize how fucking creepy this situation was. But in the moment, I just took a step towards him and punched him as hard as I could in the jaw, sort of half slapping, half pushing him towards the ground. The second I connected, I beelined up the stairs, dropping my towel in the kitchen with my heart beating out of control. I fucking sprinted into my room and locked the door behind me. I quickly put a chair up against the doorknob, like you see in TV. Almost without thinking, I immediately called 911 and, nearly in tears, told the operator what happened. As I sat on the floor of my room in practically the fetal position, I noticed that the light coming from the gap between my door had stopped. The fucker was standing outside of my door. There's no words to describe the feeling I had. I was paralyzed with fear, watching the shadow across the bottom of my door shift in tiny ways. I stayed balled up, staring at the gap, praying that the man would just go away for what seemed like an hour. All the while, the 911 operator was asking, "Hello, sir, are you there? Hello?" I didn't want to make a noise, and even if I wanted to move my arms to bring the phone up to my mouth, I don't think I could have. Eventually, the light returned to the gap, and I heard the faintest of footsteps slowly creaking the wooden floorboards as he walked down the hall. It was silent for minutes as I just sat there curled up, unable to even speak. Fear does funny things to the body. I heard banging on the front door and the sound of 2 officers entering my house. I finally felt safe, and I opened up the door to the 2 of them standing there. I almost cried. Nowadays, my parents never leave me home alone, thank God, and I check every lock on the house before going to bed. I still get nightmares occasionally, and my heart starts racing whenever I see someone standing still. But I'm doing alright. Even working with sketch artists and a few lineups, the police never found whoever the fuck was in my house. That sends shivers down my spine every time I look outside, half expecting to see him standing across the street, smiling under a lamppost.